send me a whack.
Oh, no.
There's only my grandchildren here, so, I gotta use my stuff.
Send your material for them.
Well, not a Porsche gang.
It was not.
A lot of beef in it. Beef and beef.
That's too crazy.
Yeah, it was, had a lot of beef.
A lot of beef in it. Beef.
It was B&B soup.
Yeah, you're right, it was.
Or it should be. I mean, I like the classroom silly. Like it does. Pretty good. It's a little sweet. You can't eat too much.
I hadn't eaten that, but that's just.
I like that.
Sour cream. Yeah, sorry. No, I just turned your volume off. Your volume's down.
Hi, Jackie.
Yeah, folks, I want to honor time. Thanks for being here on time. Some of you were here like early, so thank you. The four of you. And I'm sure Quick will be mulling in, and we'll just make space for them and make the circle happen.
Sorry,
That's okay. I got
I'm
it.
not, he can help me. I don't know how
Yeah, I got
to
it.
turn something
It's
off when
off
it's
now.
on. It's off. So just that.
Just unplug it.
Just.
We're working on it. It's okay.
So I can just do it like that.
No, good.
Sorry, folks.
No, take the team.
One
That's
day
okay.
I will learn to use my phone. Any day now.
So before we begin all kinds of sharing, I think it's appropriate to give some thanks to God. So that's all. Dear God, we know that when we gather, we do that with you, for you, because you, and about you. We let you be the center of our time, our lives, and ask that you continue to be the center of our community. May your healing, compassionate, merciful presence be with us and all those in our world who are living in fear, in sickness, in body, mind, or spirit. We have so many concerns with our world these days. We ask that your loving arms move in among the people that are calling out for help. For we somehow still believe and hold on to the everlasting hope. And when people cry out, we liberate and respond. And for this we give you thanks.
Amen.
I'm teaching a class tomorrow on worship in the church. And I'm excited about it, but I was preparing my lecture today, and it was just about like that, like worship in its history has been with God, about God, for God, and to God, right? So it's just, regardless of tradition, regardless of experience, and it's been since the beginning of people gathering for worship in all kinds of different places. So something that extends beyond this. So just important.
There are people on Zoom who use the mic.
Oh, yes. Sorry, folks on Zoom, welcome. Glad you're here.
I don't think that's.
It's not on.
It's green. It's green. It's still not on.
The green light's on.
Courtney is not working.
No.
You got some extra batteries?
And the green light.
The green light was on.
Is it turned on over there on the wall?
It's on. The green light's on.
Yeah, I see it.
Who fixed the phone? Yeah.
You fix the phone, fix your mic.
Well,
This is as far as I know how to do. I turn it on.
no, I just wait for the magic to happen, and it does.
And then you take credit.
Bum, 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 bum. matter how loud I am, the people on Zoom are not going to hear. Hey. And so again, a hearty welcome to the folks on Zoom. I'm sorry you missed our opening prayer, but you are welcome in this space. And I did kind of feel that it was important to kind of begin each of these Wednesday nights reminding us of the wisdom of Rumi as well as opening our hearts to God. Because I think Rumi has this wonderful invitation to kind of what changes in our world. And I can't listen to this enough. This being human, this experience is a guest house. We are all temporary. There's only one eternal. We are all temporary. Every morning is a new arrival in this life. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows, who violently sweep into your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and let them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each of these guests has been sent from the beyond. We do not always know or rarely know the Spirit's will, but our tradition tells us that oftentimes these angels come as guests, sometimes disruptive guests, life-changing guests, to invite us into change. And so the best we can do is welcome each experience and learn and grow and ask to be with and among God's presence. Amen? So our format tonight is I want to do, I've done a ton of interviews with people in the church. I've talked to a lot of folks informally, formally, spent lots of hours making that happen. And some different themes have come out about who Meetinghouse is. And I talk about, think about creating the mythopoetic story that is Meetinghouse. Like, how do you talk about what this place is to others? How do you invite others in to this experience? It's the only way churches have ever grown is by attraction, right? If people know something's positive is going on, they want to know more about it because you're talking about church when you're getting off the treadmill at the gym, or you're, in the line at the restaurant, or whatever it is, You're talking about how much you love your church. And they went, what's going on there? I don't love my church that much. And so it's just a powerful thing to understand who you are. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. A little bit some of the pain points, shadow points in the life of Meetinghouse. And how you kind of ended up in this cycle of grief in many ways, that everybody has some story of hardship and pain in these 5 years of loss of leaders, of identity, and a lot of you have lost a lot of friends who left the church, and that causes grief and pain, and so in different ways. It's all different too, because you experience it different ways. And we'll talk about that. And I'll talk about some of the things that came up in these interviews was not just kind of what was bad or what the grief was, but also, boy, there's some amazing things. There's some joys, some ways to be community and to share deeper with each other. And you all have those stories too. But all those things are true. And so I'm going to package that up tonight with a little bow. And then respond, because I also did the caveat last week, I'll say it again, I may be totally wrong, right? I didn't interview everybody. There's other stories there. There's other things. I missed some nuances. I was corrected last week on some things. I'll make those corrections. I am totally fallible. I make mistakes all the time. I try to make at least 10 a day and make one of them really big.
take a risk and make a mistake, and then ask for grace and forgiveness along the way. And that's kind of what I'm doing here as well. So as I'm trying to do the best I can, but I'm going to take risks to make that happen. And if I make a mistake, I'm sorry, and I don't mean to, but it's bound to happen because I'm human, as we all are. And then after we talk a little bit about kind of my little report time, I'm going to spend some time talking about the possibility of having a deeper connection with this denomination that y'all are a part of. And I found some information about that you are a part of that. Somehow along the way, you got a number that says, this congregation affirmed that experience at some point. And there's just a resource there that is not going to try to control you, but is certainly there to help if you need it. So we'll talk a little bit about what that is and the beliefs and understandings of the United Church of Christ. So that's our format. And I'll take some drinks along the way. And during that time of feedback, I'll need somebody to run the microphone around. Thank you, Sally. Sally's awesome. You're not now, but just.
I'm ready.
If you want to interrupt me anytime, just tell me, because you have a microphone now. You have power. It's interesting. Part of this study is also, I spent a lot of time going through the Post-its. Those 300 plus Post-its from your talkback sessions that were in the depth of the pain places. There was 2 talkback times, one in September, one in October. And I got a chance to disseminate and learn and grow from those experiences. And even in those moments, when there was deep expressed grief around Jeff's departure, around what people thought were the council's authority and all kinds of different things, and Sarah's departure and never having kind of dealt with those issues and all kinds of stuff. Name change was in there. Lots of grief, right, that was expressed. And so just want to honor that. And there was also in people's experiences gratitude that this church has experienced other moments of deep transition for those longtime members. Here we are again, finding ourselves kind of at odds with each other, kind of butting heads a little bit. And every time we've done that, we've come out on the other side and a little bit stronger. And that was acknowledged too. And it reminded me that sometimes when these kind of things happen, like in the poem from Rumi, is greeting a challenge, a trial, something even that kind of cleans your house, welcome it in. And what can we learn from that, and how can we be better and grow from these experiences? It's hard to do in the moment. I mean, it's really hard to do in the moment. But my guess is all of you have had grief at some point in your life and loss in some way, shape, or form. And after some time, there's often a little gem, a glimmer of gratitude for that person, that experience, and then you start changing, and your grief begins to be part of your life, and the churches can do the same thing. Like, yes, this happened. It's hard in the moment, and then you notice we asked the same questions in September and October, and the September Post-its were raw, really raw. The October were less raw. There was still some rawness. If we did it the same thing again, there would be a lot less raw this time, because time has passed. There's been growth. People have decided to stay because they love their community and they love their relationships. And so it's how you frame these kind of conflicts often kind of decides how you're going to move through it, right? And so that's a big learning. And honestly, some people, when I talk to them, were not ready for that. I talked to several people who I was mean, I got names of people to talk to because people on staff or people in leadership said, oh, you should talk to these folks. Some of those folks left, and they wanted me to go and kind of chase after them and bring them back. But it was just too raw, right? And so they weren't ready to kind of move into that kind of way. So it's in the process of looking at the series of losses, if we look at the conflicts that Meetinghouse has had every so many years, I don't think it's on a specific cycle. You know, it's not like every 6 years here comes a conflict and you can get ready for it. They happen in different times and places. They are often revolved around the leaving of a senior minister, right? That's kind of the main story, is that's and almost all of those senior ministers engendered some story around conflict, if not all of them. Multiple stories around conflict. And there was also a lot of love for those senior ministers and their ministry. And so I don't want to say anything negative about any of those senior ministers. I think that's owned by both the congregation and the pastor when there's kind of a hard ending. And if there's lots of blame to go around, if you want to do that blame thing, that's not helpful. But what can be helpful is how you look at responsibility, missed opportunities, you know, how you could do things better. And so what I want you all to kind of just be really clear about and like shine a big giant spotlight on is say, hey, we recognize a pattern in our community that's hard and painful. When we hire the next pastor or pastors, or we're going to do that well, and we'll welcome them well, and we'll plan a great ending for them even when they begin. Like, we know that they're going to have a great ending. And you start seeding that energy in that life. And I want you to do that for Christian. Whenever Christian leaves, and that will happen because pastors don't stay forever, right? You should do a great ending for Christian and break that cycle. Wouldn't that be great? You know?
But don't leave anytime soon.
But really, I mean, it's just, that will be such a different, it'll be a game changer for the community and culture if you figure out how to make that happen. Like, kind of really embrace that ministry and totally tell Christian, hey, you really messed up this time, and this time. You blew it. And we love you anyway. And we forgive you. And Christian will come back and say, you know, congregation, I've loved serving here, and you blew it this time, and this time. And the congregation will say, yeah, we did. We were not the best congregation for you, and we're sorry. And that mutual vulnerability and forgiveness and love will write a new chapter in the story of Meetinghouse Church. I think that'll be completely different than any time you've ever had a transition, from what I understand. So, I could be wrong, but I think that would just be a huge game changer. So, in these transitions, and again, it's not, I would never deny the amazing ministry that has happened here, because this church has done phenomenal work, missionally, connected to other people in the world. You've obviously grown to this, to a great size and discipleship, and pastors have a hand in that. They're not the only ones that do that, but they have a hand in that. And we celebrate all those leaders. And the endings have been less than stellar, right? And you can change that pattern. So that's one of the big pieces. Does that feel like it makes sense? And part of that is that seeing this church as your church and not the pastor's church. Part of this problem is over-identification with the pastors and loyalty towards pastors versus community. And as a seminary professor who trains pastors to be pastors, I tell all of them, no matter what your call is, whether it's 3 months or 30 years, you're temporary. You know, it's never your church. It's always the people's church. It's God's church, right? It's about their relationship with God. And you gotta, I mean, I've told the search committee this too. Talk to your candidates about, I mean, being an interim minister, even if the title is settled minister, we're all interim, right? And it's not the way kind of corporate mindset works sometimes, like, but it's really healthy sometimes too. Short-term folks can get a lot done versus people who are embedded and stay around forever, right? So that's just a true thing. You get a chance to help those pastors define that role. Everybody's interim. Because if a senior minister takes on all the responsibility of the church and the people, that's also a recipe for leaving poorly and kind of just checking out sometimes. And you've had that experience too, right? So you are the people of God. You know, Jesus is the cornerstone of that church. Follow that and you'll be fine. Part of this is that because loyalty is often what separates and divides. People feel closer to somebody or not others, and then when it becomes the pastor, there's some type of projection around who God is in the midst of that, because pastors carry that whether they want to or not. And so try not to be loyal to your pastor. Tell Christian when he's messing up and love him anyway. That's a great model, right? And Kathy Monson-Lutz. The other thing that I think that is part of the history of Meetinghouse that I've heard from several folks that has been lost in some ways, not lost, just kind of less vibrant, I guess, because you're still a very generous congregation. But in your past, you were a really generous congregation. You started nonprofits, you did amazing work, you were kind of outward focused. You did some really amazing pieces for the city of Minneapolis, for homeless folks. You're still doing that work, but on a different level. And so I think you can ramp up your generosity, not just to your mission partners, because that's important, and I think that's where your best part is, because you're doing that really, really well. But there's other needs too. And there's needs that pop up acutely and that can be responded to that, you know, and it may be family needs in this community, and it may be family needs of the folks that live across the street. And figure out what that means to make that happen. And I know one of the great things about congregations is when they do respond. When somebody walks in and says, you know, they just had a house fire, and the church says, you know, instead of worship today, we're going to go help you clean your house. Because being with each other, responding to the needs of our neighborhood is more important. Not that I wish anybody have a fire, but that's the kind of response is, you know, how can we really see what's going on in the world and make a difference there? And I asked last week, and it's happening already, is, you know, the big wildfires in California, in Los Angeles, we were trying to figure out the mechanism to do a special offering because in the staff transition, it was kind of lost. Like there was no way for the people in the pews to gather and say, hey, we care about people who are not us, right? And so we're trying to revamp some of that, that just the possibility of responding, because those systems get lost in the midst of transition. The systems about how to incorporate visitors into the life of the church is gaining back rhythm again. But it was lost for a while because that happens in transition. And so those are some of the things that kind of came up in the midst of this generosity, that this is not about us. And I have a little quote. Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the president of the World Council of Churches for a time, and UN worker, said, whether today is the last day of the world and the world is on fire, or the best day, and you are surrounded in love, your job, your faith still compels you to love and feed those who are lonely and hungry. The ministry of Matthew 31 is still right there, 25, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Matthew 25, 31. Yeah, I was just doing verse instead of chapter, sorry. So, that's kind of the pastoral piece, the leadership piece, and kind of uncovering some of these stories that have just been out there and have become pain points and historical kind of tales that are told around the building and around the congregation. And and one of the reality pieces of that in any congregation is there's people who are new that don't know those stories. So they don't even need to hear them. You could just do it better going forward, right? And so you don't always have to tell the stories that happened 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Although people do like to tell those stories at Meetinghouse Church, don't they? But know that they're interesting stories, but they're not necessary for how you move forward unless you change or learn from those experiences. Another piece that was kind of a major piece that came up in a lot of conversations was the people just had a very positive experience of this because it was one of the really congregation melding, growth, reflective, spiritual depth moments was the creation of your values. So the welcome beloved piece, the risk, immerse, wrestle, do good, were not just words on a page or words on a banner. It was a depth process that involved a lot of people, and that process really galvanized a lot of the folks in the community. And not, unfortunately, because of some crises that happened, not much was done with them. And so I think they still have resonance. And Nate brings it up sometimes when was struck by the values when he came to Meeting House that they really have power in a walk of faith. And if you can kind of own them some way or somehow find a way to sing them and dance them and create art around them or whatever you choose to do about them, the better off I think you're going to be because they have a story of connecting people when they were created, and I think you can re-earth that story again, because I think that's what the longing is of Meeting House is connection, and I think your values are tied to that connection. So to really risk some of what makes me look good, wrestle with what Jesus is calling you to do, immerse yourself more in your life of faith than sometimes the pocketbook, right? And again, doing that missional generosity work there's nothing better than that, right? That's just going to make you better as a community, and you have those resources there. I asked the youth. I did a program for the youth on Sunday after church, and I said, the values are not up in the pond room. You ever go to the pond room, anybody? It's been a while for a lot of folks in the church to been to the pond room. But they don't have any values up. And I said, what happened? They said, well, they were up for a couple years, and then they got tattered and torn, and so we took them down. So
They were used.
I don't know. They may have been used, but yeah, it could have been. But again, remind yourself all the time of why they're there and what's going on. And that includes all ages. I bring up the pond room because there's a ministry happening back there with the kids that people may be disconnected from. And the church is stronger if you're connected to that ministry. And they're more likely to stay connected to the church if they're involved in your ministry and they hear your stories. And so don't be shy about making a friend with a young person in your community. So, values. The other piece, obviously, that was a big deal was grief and ritual. I've mentioned this a lot since I first came, is I was hoping to kind of come and be a person to, not any necessarily formal capacity, but just kind of be an officiant at Jeff's last Sunday to give a very clear ritual of leaving and to work with that experience. That timing didn't work out right, and so I came in later, but there was just like this deep emptiness about we didn't get a chance to say that farewell, goodbye in a way that was good and healthy, and either you or Jeff. And I don't think that happened with other people who left as well. And so I think there's a chance to experience ritual, and the Healing Task Force is working on some ritual. And so your job is to kind of say yes and be open to those rituals and witness about what it feels like to witness what it means to have a good experience of saying goodbye. And again, going back to your own experiences of grief, you know when it's a good death, right? When somebody has that experience, they're surrounded by family and friends, they take their last breath, and you can feel their spirit move from that body into your body, and it's just nothing like it, right? Good ritual around grief, naming your hopes and dreams, naming all the stupid, funny things that person did, and forgiving them before they leave this world. That's all good stuff, and individuals need to do that, but so do communities. And so that's just kind of a part about how to do that well, and that's a part of acknowledging big events and anniversaries and special occasions, and that's just kind of awareness, right? I was just kind of mindful in the middle of the service on the candlelight service, not the candlelight, the Christmas service on the 15th of December. I said, that's hard for a lot of people because it's the first time without Jeff in 40 years. People remember his leadership. And just to say that in one sentence would be like, oh yeah. And then you can have a great service, but you got to acknowledge these moments, these again, liminal space moments that are there. And there are anniversaries coming up of Sarah's leaving, of Jeff's leaving. How does the community hold those anniversaries? And there's real positive anniversaries, right? The anniversary of Christian Wynn becoming your pastor, right, is going to come up. Celebrate it, right? He may have an ordination anniversary coming up. Do you? Celebrate those things. Make those, figure it out and make those things happen. And that trains the culture to just kind of think of, we are in this together. We're honoring our leaders. You can do that with lay people as well. I was thinking the other night, this is for Aaron. Aaron's not here, but you can take this to Aaron. So I was in a church, and I was very grateful. It wasn't my idea, by the way. But I was at this church council meeting, and it was the evening of my 8-year-old's birthday. And I shouldn't have been at a council meeting. I should have been home with my kid, right? But I'm the pastor. I need to be at the church. Blah, blah, blah. So my priorities are messed up, right? That's on me. However, if a pastor or a lay leader sacrifices a moment with their family, it's important, a night of the anniversary, a birthday, because we all have done it, then there's got to be a fund to say, thank you for your sacrifice. Here's a gift card. Go take that person out. That's community. It's not just pastors. If the church council chair shows up and sacrifices the family, because that will happen, right? And it's not every council meeting. It's just, special occasion kind of things. Honor it. Honor those sacrifices, and you will go much better. I'm sure that would help, right? As a moderator, if somebody said, thank you for showing up, and we're sorry that church took precedent over your family tonight. We know that's hard, and you're going to have to deal with an angry spouse when you get home. Right? So, but that's one of those experiences of how you do grief ritual well, is honoring each of these kind of occasions, and they can just come up, and that could just be a fund, and you may never use it, right? But boy, would it be nice if you honored your lay leadership and your clergy leadership in that kind of way. So, and the last piece around this section is the opening to healing restoration, right? And I said before, most everyone has wounds about the past few years, but they go back much longer than Jeff's departure. Honoring Jeff's ministry, but that he was a poor fit for the role. That's the other consultant's report. It's just clear when I've talked to people who actually adored him, he just wasn't the right fit for that role. And there's a bunch of folks who called him to that role who feel bad, like they're holding that grief, that they were on the council during that time, and they're like, we put the church in this danger. Well, maybe in a small way, but let's just say, yeah, we're sorry. Because the congregation did support it. It wasn't just them, right? But I know that there's several people I've talked to who are on the council then who are hurting, you know? And so there's just lots of ways we can do healing, restoration. And part of what Nate's doing a great job right sizing and job descriptions and different things for the staff. But as they figure out who they are as staff, I think the congregation should see each staff person in person and thank them for their new role and identify it and lay hands on them, pray on them, love them, and say, thank you for doing this new role. And we're sorry that you've been doing things because it's been a crazy transition time. And you could do that all for all the current staff, and then as new people come on as well.
Now, you skipped over something right there.
Yeah.
Nate is putting together.
Because people are on Zoom.
Hello, people on Zoom.
Yes.
You skipped over something there. You said Nate is putting together some descriptions or something. What is Nate doing? I don't really know.
That's for another all evening, but I can say briefly, as executive director, he's doing some staff leadership and systematic leadership and partnering with Christian on how to run the church. So he's directing staff into their roles. And it's something that hadn't been done for a long time, including policies, procedures, all kinds of things. But and being a mensch. So look at him. He's just being a mensch. So those are my big findings, the pain points, some of the shadow work that y'all are invited to. And and just I'm curious, how is that? How do you receive that? Do you think that's true? Do you have any different story or corroborating story about that experience? And Sally would be glad to bring you a microphone. Any surprises? Probably not. Nothing? You want to get to denominational stuff? Okay. Okay. So the nearest I can figure out is in the early 1980s, y'all took a vote to join the NACCC, the National Association of Congregational Christian Churches, and the United Church of Christ. I don't see any record of joining the 4 Cs, but it was part of the conversation, I think. But it's hard to join them because they're not really organized. I think you just kind of say, we like them, right? But the NACCC and the UCC are denominational identities. And so in the United Church of Christ frame, which is where I come from, I'm a UCC polity teacher, teach history, theology, and polity at the UCC. That means that you get, when you make those votes, a number that identifies you as a member of the United Church of Christ.
Yes.
Yeah. 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 Nate was right there smiling the whole time. So y'all joined the UCC, at least in name, because I think it was a historic denomination that had congregational roots. which was primarily important, I believe, for Arthur Rauner. And that was the only reason to join the UCC. Maybe, right? And there have been, again, in some of your file stuff back there, different dabs into, like, there was a time in the early 90s, there was a time in the late 90s, there was a time in the early aughts, where you sent a report to the UCC about the membership, the finances, how many confirmation people, how many deaths, all that kind of stuff. It's a report that every UCC church does. You get an email every year about that report, and you filled them out periodically, which is very nice, right? In the Minnesota Conference, there's 120-some churches. There's an annual meeting every year. There are times when members of Colonial then served on conference committees, went to conference meetings. The last person I think who did that was Greg Meeland, who was here for a long time. And so he held that, but he told me that he says, but I never really reported back to the church what I did. I just did it because I like to have my community in the UCC. So thanks, Greg, kind of, but that all goes to say is that in the United Church of Christ, we speak as a denominational person, we can't speak for any local church. We can only speak to you, suggest, recommend, here's an idea, here's an offering. Like you're offering this Sunday to the wildfires will be administered by the local churches in Los Angeles County who are doing direct relief effort. All the overhead is taken care of by denominational resources. All the offerings from churches all over the country and the world are going right to help people who are in greatest need. It's the best offerings you can have, right? That's what being a part of denominational work does, is connects you to resources to make that happen. In the process, to know that the UCC not only speaks to, but not for you, it is also covenantal in the theology. The major government in the UCC is the local church. Right? The conference doesn't tell you what to do. It listens to the local church about where to put those resources, how to make things happen. And so we're always listening to local churches. Meetinghouse just hasn't been part of the conversation in a long time, if ever. And I think the invitation, the search committee is now listening to the UCC in their process, hopefully get you some really good candidates for ministry. If and when this, a crisis happens between a council and a pastor in a UCC church that gets that, their first call is to the denomination and says, help. And you know what happens with that? You get denominational lawyers, you don't have to pay for them yourself. The resources you all spent on HR and lawyers and all that kind of stuff, that's denominational resource that you didn't use. It was there, and it will be there, and it will always be there. There's really a hard way to get out of the UCC. You can choose to vote to do that. But the respect for the local church and their autonomy is very much there. They follow the same belief systems, I brought a hymnal today for Tom. And it says, in the beginning of the hymnal, Jesus today, yesterday, today, and forever, from the book of Hebrews. Great line. Acknowledging that the hymnal is a bunch of words and music that has changed throughout time. The hymnal is not the Bible. So it just acknowledges that our faith, this is God's church, and we're going to continue to follow that. Our vows for ordination as UCC pastors are the same vows your pastors are going to take and have taken. There's just not a lot of difference. And so, yeah.
Does the UC,
Yeah.
Does the UCC also help a congregation take care of its pastors financially, with pension, with some of the things that a congregation might not necessarily have the resources to do?
Absolutely.
I mean, there's so much of that.
Yeah, you all have your own pension program for your employees. You administer that. That's a UCC resource. You don't have to do that. You all have your own healthcare plan. Again, UCC has a healthcare plan. They have recommendations. There are always recommendations about how to compensate your pastors, how to give, make sure they have the right vacation, sabbatical time, all that kind of stuff. But they're guides to make those relationships more powerful. And in the UCC, it's really clear, like I have to do continuing ed all the time, both on boundary training, so I'm getting my own life in order, my own spiritual life, and anti-racism training. So in a diverse world, we're able to kind of respond with the biggest open-hearted way, the gospel message. And so these, again, resources that, and is, again, I know Dan Harrell fairly well, I knew who he was, and met him because he did some continuing education with the UCC. And unfortunately, was one of the blind spots of Jeff. We can't figure out whether he did any of, I know he didn't do denominational continuing ed, but any community ed, because he wasn't in an accountable denominational setting. And I don't want that for you, for your next pastor, right? I want you to have somebody that has colleagues, care, camaraderie, spiritual health, both inside and outside the church. So, yeah.
If I'm understanding you right, basically, a Meetinghouse is part of the UCC.
And the NACC.
And has been for many, many years.
Yes.
But we just have not been utilizing the resources that they have.
Yep.
And there's nothing we have to do to begin to use it.
Not at all.
Okay.
No, I mean, there is a, like in the healthcare world, there's an open enrollment period. You have to kind of wait for that, but that's true of almost everybody. But
Is there a financial contribution required of this church to the UCC, particularly head tax? Or?
There is, again, no requirement. There is an invitation, right? Our church's wider mission is all the churches come together to fund our conference work, our camps, our missional work, that kind of stuff. And churches give to that, but it's a pledge. Just like each family is not required to pledge to the church, but most do. Most UCC churches pledge to the conference. There are other offerings, but they're, again, all voluntary. The conference has one other, I don't think you ever get an invoice. It's just an invitation. I think it's a letter that says churches will do I think it's $5 a year per head to the denomination. And not every church can afford that, and not every church does it. But it's just another funding mechanism. So, but it's, again, it's all choice. And it's, like I say, it's all carrot, no stick. Yeah.
I think there are people here who are members who...
Yeah, put it right next to your mouth.
Just bring it up closer.
I'm sure there are people here who are actually members and maybe have been for a long time. There's nothing physical in or outside of this building that identifies it with any denomination. It's on the website, but people don't know this is a congregational church. And it's not on any signage. It's my understanding that 2 new signs outside are temporary, or aren't they?
I heard that too.
And there could be something on a new sign that says a congregational community, or if not on the sign, on the outside of the main entrance, on the siding. This is a congregational community, or belonging to the UCC as well. People don't know that. You know, that identification isn't anywhere.
Yeah, part of my proposal, and I've talked to some of your leadership about this, is I really think that there should be, when I leave, 6 or 7 folks that just take a year and explore the relationship. Learn more about what it means to kind of go to the annual meeting. Go to some ecclesiastical councils. You ever heard that term before? That's a council of the church, right? Church gathered, and they vote whether people have fitness for ministry and can become ordained. They're wonderful events. You get to learn about the theology of the people who are preparing for ministry, and you get to ask questions. Why do you believe that? Tell me more about your Christology or your walk with Jesus. You can ask questions, because in the UCC, every member of every UCC congregation has voice and vote at those gatherings of the church. Isn't that cool? Yeah. Right? That's the congregational way. The independent, we're in it for ourselves way is what you've been doing, but the connection hasn't been there. And you never know. There could be some amazing retreat that they're doing in some church, and they're going to invite the rest of this area, this West Metro area, to those retreats. And you could have a spiritual experience that you never knew of because you're connected in ministry. And I just want that possibility to be thought of and to think about those connections. I will never say anything bad about the NACCC. They're just a much smaller denomination with no staff, so there's no program. There is a group, and they do get together every so often. They used to have a little more robust, but they've really shrunk over the years. And there were times when Meetinghouse did do NACCC youth events and different things, but it was a long time ago. So.
I don't know. I was going to say, I think that as a parenthetical comment, I don't think it's just that there were no folks there are often a lot of folks in the congregation that don't know that we're part of the UCC. I think it was also part of the staff culture even, because it took a little while for me to be here to realize. And at one point on our website, I don't know if it's still there, but if it is, we need to address it. It says an independent congregational church. And that's, essentially that would be antithetical to some extent to what we're trying to talk about.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I love the idea actually of the signage, like a congregational community. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I've also been very impressed with your missional outreach, like I said, to your mission partners and that kind of stuff. I think this would be great for other churches to say, hey, let's 6 churches go in with a Vivo and make something happen. Let's have 20 churches go into this organization and make something happen. And it just expands your outreach in a way that, and y'all can take a lead in some of those things because you have these strong relationships. The camp thing as well, right? I mean, conference camps are alive and well, youth programs, different things. And that's just good assistance and good ways for people to develop their faith. So
now, it's my impression from being around here a lot of years that we have recruited ministers from multiple denominations.
Yep.
And that they have not necessarily, then are they ordained in the UCC, or do they just keep going on about their way? Or does that make any difference? I mean, some of our, are you a UCC minister? Well, I was going to say, and I'll say it now particularly, some of our best ministers have not been from the UCC, and it doesn't seem to have hurt them at all. So
ask him that question in a year and see if he's UCC or not.
Okay, well, good for you.
But you're right, and the UCC is not going to say you have to have a UCC minister. They would welcome Kathy Munson Lutz to serve you from the Episcopal tradition. And if that person wanted to have dual standing, which is a foot in both traditions, or privilege of call and switch traditions, that's certainly acceptable. And many UCC churches have in their bylaws their pastors will obtain dual standing or privilege of call during their service. You don't have to do that, but it just helps you stay in covenant and have those relational contexts.
Yeah, it's not so much that, again, it's that itsy-bitsy preposition that D. Michael keeps using. It's not so much that the UCC will, and a UCC minister will tell you what to do, what to think, what, or any of those things. The person might be, a UCC minister can attend any seminary. It's that ecclesiastical body that asks the questions and wonders about the faith life, the theology, all of those things. What I think is most important is that the congregation, Meetinghouse, has these amazing opportunities to connect with, so that your senior pastor and others will be in collegial relationships with other pastors. I can't tell you how important. I went to mine yesterday afternoon, my get-together with my collegial, So we get together and we talk about the stuff going on in the world. We talk about the stuff going on in the church. We talk, and then we support each other in all of that. It has everything to do with boundaries. It has everything to do with support and keeping us sane and centered.
And while the microphone's going there, I'll say that like the youth of the Minnesota Conference this summer, like 12 youth are funded almost fully to go to Iona.
Oh, wow.
I mean, just think about what an opportunity it is for some of your high school kids, right? Last year, they 50 kids from Minnesota Conference went to do the anti-gun work at the Capitol, funded by the conference. The conference, by the way, is in a very good financial place because they have a giant endowment for youth and young adult priorities, that's why they're doing this kind of stuff. They're dreaming big and making it happen for the kids. So, yeah.
It's my understanding, I might be wrong, but that the pastors in this church, at least, I don't know if this is commonplace in congregational churches or in the UCC, but that this congregation has ordained our ministers.
Yes.
And that they're not ordained by the church body. And so that's totally different relationship with the ministers than I'm used to as a Lutheran, because the Lutherans ordain their pastors and then they're called out to congregations. But this congregation, you're called to this congregation. I guess like we all are. We're all called to this congregation as ministers, but that we choose to ordain certain people in our community.
Yes,
and that's a different responsibility, I think.
It is. That's a long ago congregational thing. That's true of a lot of New England congregations, had that independent streak and did their own ordaining. And those congregational churches realized that it was really sometimes irresponsible because those people then couldn't hit the marketplace and go somewhere else if their family moved or something happened because they weren't ordained by a denomination. And so it's hard for those pastors as well as the church sometimes.
And I was going to say just two parenthetical comments is it's been a mix because you guys didn't ordain me. I was already ordained when I came, but Sarah, for instance, was. Yeah.
The pastor here. Yeah.
Yeah.
She is an independent, it makes it very hard for her to get another ministry job. So she's also exploring denominational work right now.
And then I would say my understanding is that there were multiple dynamics involved in the vote that happened in the 80s to join at least the UCC and the NACC. And one of the dynamics was that Arthur felt that it was good for the ministers because they would be able then to do the connecting work that you were kind of talking about.
Yeah.
That was one part of the motivation.
And when the UCC ordains somebody, it's in partnership with the local church. It's not like you'd lose it. It's there's a role for both the local setting and the pastor and the denomination to have a role in those ordinations. They're beautiful services. Some of my favorites.
So I'm curious to Michael, if there would be any opportunities or support from the UCC that would help us with the issue of our space and sharing our space, you know, and kind of in the broader picture of just like the trends in the mainline church in general, that, you know, the churches that are booming with resources, people, money, are not necessarily the kind of churches that we are, right? And that's just a trend across mainline churches in general. And so as we look to like, what does a sustainable future look like for this community with your time and money that is able to be given here and now? I know it's an ongoing conversation about like the building, right? And how do we use the space? And we've made efforts and we've had some successes, and then people leave or entities leave, that sort of thing. But that's such a big component of especially our financial viability going forward. And so I'm just curious, would a connection with the UCC help facilitate that in any way?
Yeah, because it's relational, right? So a lot of churches are talking about the same thing as you said. I know in my clergy group, when we get together, a lot of them are churches that have declined, but they're in these big buildings all over the cities. And there's a nonprofit called the Flourish Collective, which is about changing your space into a more, economical nonprofit kind of experience. And I think every one of my colleagues who has a building they're responsible for is now contracting with Flourish, and they got a lesser rate because they're doing it together. And so there is it's collaboration. It's having colleagues, and it's dreaming in ministry together, and what the next steps are.
Isn't there another issue that we need to be aware of?
Yes.
And that is, if you go to the UCC website, it's, I'll use the term, quite liberal, and we would be identifying, if we increase our identification with UCC, aren't we, as a church, advocating a UCC position, which is a pretty strong political position, and that could be a divisive factor within our church where we've tried to avoid that issue going forward.
Yes, so I always say the UCC is like a tabletop. There's like a local churches, conferences, national setting. The national setting of the church, very, very liberal. Super liberal, very queer affirming since 1985. It was first denomination to ordain black folks, gay folks, women. I mean, they're out there in the front all the time doing progressive, innovative things, not because it's politically correct, but because they really feel the Spirit's moving in that direction. The conferences are sometimes less liberal than that, and the local churches can do whatever they want to do. So in the open and affirming thing, it started 85. I said this a couple Wednesday nights ago. They've been doing that movement for 40 years, right? 85 to now. There's about a third of the UCC churches, over 5,000 churches, that are open and affirming. 2/3 are not. So you still get your identity, whoever you are, right?
But the people that might have issues with things, we'll go to the website, which is the liberal part of the UCC, not the conservative part, and could react to that. And I'm all for doing that.
Yep.
But we're going to have people that won't like that.
That's true. And again, this is next week, a little bit of little guide into next week. One of the things I've heard a lot about from a lot of interviews is the desire to be more open and affirming, to be more out there in your theology, to welcome people of various differences, whether it's mental health, disabilities, queer folks, just different folks who are looking for those markers, whether this church is welcoming or not. And so not only should I think you should have a UCC task force, there's probably alongside or some parallel path, some type of open and affirming task force as well to explore what that would mean and whether the congregation wants to do that. Because that's up to you all to figure that out. But like in Minnesota, like I said, there's 120 churches. I think that, again, about a third are open and affirming. So you get to be who you are. But it is something that people are asking in these interviews, like they really want, and I think you were all on that path during Sarah and Andrew's leadership. There is this really kind of wonderful queer affirming statement, by the way, on your website, whether you know it or not, around youth ministry.
Around what?
Youth ministry. Like,
What does it say?
it says that you're open to every kid, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity. Every story is welcome. It's really a nice statement. And it was worked hard on, and I'm sure those kids prayed about it and made it happen. From what I hear, it came from a good place, and they're owning it back in the pond room. But it doesn't mean the church owns it, right? Because y'all haven't done that process. But it's a process. And it can, I think, be a really healthy process. I said that two of the churches I led during my career became open affirming during my time as the pastor, and we never lost a member. Because we listened deeply to people, and we did it with a deep sense of faith and understanding, and we knew that individuals can also have your own faith, right, and your own expression. But the agreement that we're not going to turn people away was important enough. So, and they included even more than that, more than GLBT folks, but folks who are poor. Like there's people who are struggling. I mean, you may want to say that out in the world. That you can come here, right? You may want to say, especially to folks with mental illnesses, you can come here. You may get a candidate for ministry who can't climb the steps to the pulpit. What are you going to do? You going to respond and provide accommodations or say, nope, we're going to carry you up there and put you in that pulpit to preach to us? No. You find a way to make it work, right? Because your hearts are open to human beings, regardless of how they show up in the world. So that's the process.
Just one thought
So,
about, Algin, what you were saying about the UCC website being, liberal. One thing I've encouraged myself to do and encourage others to do, mainly in the healthcare issue, because that's been my background, but be curious. And for instance, if the UCC website says that, okay, then look further. What does that mean for us? And encourage, if we encounter people who make a decision right away from one statement or two statements, to encourage them, and I encourage myself too, okay, let's go further. What does that mean for our congregation? What would that mean? And then as you go through the process, you find out a lot. So I'm just saying, I think if we become more involved with UCC and it becomes part of our website and whatnot, as we encounter people who are frightened or disturbed, to be able to encourage them to say, let's go deeper, let's stay curious here and not make a knee-jerk decision on one thing. Does that make sense?
That was beautiful. I'm kind of teary. I'm hoping you. I hope you. I hope you get a chance to tell that story in other places too, because that's super important. I'll tell a little story about a president of the UCC, John Thomas. John tells this story a lot, but he was on a bus ride with the Pentecostal Church in Chile on a World Council of Churches junket in South America. And the bus is full of denominational leaders from around the world with their interpreters. And they got John cornered on this 3-hour bus ride. And it was right after the UCC became affirmed same-gender marriage. And they were saying, okay, John, how did you do this? Like, individually, apparently, from what John says, they felt big open-heartedness for this decision, but none of them had a denomination that would accept it. And they were sad. And they said, how did you do this work? And John said, well, this happened several years ago, is we were asked by some folks leading this Bible study around how important our sacraments were to us, baptism and communion. And what are your covenants around baptism? And he said, well, in our book of worship, it says, we promise our love, support, and care in the name of Jesus. And in the Bible study, is there any provision to take that away? And he goes, no, that's now and forever. We always promise our love, support, and care. We'll never take that away. Well, what if that person commits a crime? What if that person ends up as gay? What if that person, they went through all the, he says, no, we would never take that away. And for him, that was like, I have no choice. And so he tells that story of saying, baptism matters. The dignity, humanity, love that people share matter. And it's more important because it's centered in Jesus. And so that's why the UCC, I think, is grounded in that. That setting has done that work. Not every local church has done the work. Right? So
I just wanted to say, we're talking about getting maybe a stronger denominational identity, but there are some of the most successful churches here in the Twin Cities that have stepped away from their denominational identification. You know, you'd have to dig down a little bit to find that Wooddale is just an old Baptist church, you know.
Yep.
And similarly, I think, is Grace also a Baptist church? I think so. So those two churches, huh? What are they part of? I mean, what were they, though?
They were something.
Yeah, I'm saying, so they've been a denomination. They've stuck with some of those practices, I think, but they don't headline it in their name.
That's true. Eagle Brook, same way, right?
Exactly.
What's your point? Just that
My point is that maybe we're talking about, you know, identifying more with a denomination. I mean, I think the idea of putting up a congregational community, I like that. But that's not the way the world seems to be going. The world seems to be going the other way of trying to get more amorphous names, and maybe then they hook you after you get in there, but Eagle Brook is a good example. Well,
in the history of churches in America, not just Twin Cities, one crisis can devolve any size church that is independent. It's just, and we have, there are, you know, pictures of large sanctuaries empty all over the landscape in the U.S. of churches that were thriving once, but one conflict can take down an independent church so fast. So
There's a lot to be said about telling the truth. And I think that's my experience with churches that have gone that sort of non-denominational route, is that I don't always get the truth about who they are and what they believe when I walk inside that door. I would prefer to know and to hear the truth about who that church is and who those people, what those people believe about their life in Christ, what those people believe about their life in community, in the community of faith. And I just think that's terribly, terribly important. And I think part of this is about truth-telling, being very, very careful with telling the truth about who we are and all of the boils and all of the warts that come along with that journey of a community of faith.
I like that you use the word aspiration. Some of this is aspirational, and we may not be there. That doesn't mean we can't be there. And taking Janet's, we think, we listen, we ponder, we pray.
Yeah.
It's a process. It is a process, but it is possible.
I also noticed that we're kind of past our time, so.
One last comment, just to the point that you made. I think, so first of all, I think the truth-telling part is really important. That is, it is true, like you often will go into non-denominational churches that actually do function in a certain kind of way, but it's sort of submerged. And you sort of have to figure out, it's kind of like, half the people in the congregation, or many of them don't realize it's a congregation, that kind of thing. And so I think the truth-telling part's important. I think the network part is very, very important. Just simply what we've gone through has shown some of that. But I think the sort of trend question, I think what you put your finger on is something that probably reached its peak in the 90s. And maybe into the early 2000s. And yes, Eagle Brook is still doing well, but most growth across the United States are people going back to more traditional churches, like Catholic churches and Episcopal churches, and churches that aren't afraid to own their denominational identity, in part because we have gone through so much profound upheaval culturally, and also we're now, the environment, all that. There's something not just comforting, but I think, and not even just safe, but a sense of the solidity. Yeah, to be grounded in a tradition is no longer, it doesn't quite bear the same kind of pariah status maybe it did before, where a tradition was the problem. We needed to get away from it. So I think that that the trend is actually shifting a little bit, even though I think your point still stands to some extent. I don't know though that it's and I don't know if church growth trends should ultimately dictate one way or the other the decision that we would make, but I just wanted to say as like a counterfactual to that.
I think we need to, I'm just going to say this, I think we need to get this discussion going in the congregation, though. Because I think, 90% of the people at this church don't know what we're part of or what that church
Yeah.
the UCC believes.
Yeah, and that's my suggestion, is that as I leave here, I really do believe, I did not plan on being at Meetinghouse. I didn't know much about your community. I had lunch with this brother over here, and the Spirit kind of opened up this possibility that I sometimes celebrate and sometimes regret that this all happened. But I do really believe that part of that is it was the UCC saying, we're here, and you're not alone, and here's this guy that can come help you out. And my colleagues would tease me that it's hard to get more UCC than T. Michael.
Well, it's interesting because I've been at this church for many, many years, and I thought we were an independent congregational church.
Yeah.
I didn't know that we were part of the UCC, so.
We are.
So you have been operating as an independent congregational church. There's no doubt. And I just want to say, and I do want to end this, but I'll give you the last word. But I forget what I was going to say. It was important, though. Go ahead. I'll remember.
It's nothing. Except, I was just going to comment. When we moved here in 1984, that's right around when that happened. because I remember Arthur talking about it, and he did go to the meetings.
Yeah.
And he came back pumped about the meetings with the UCC. And I had never heard of Congregational. I had certainly never heard of the UCC, so I was a little bit curious. I think that's why it stuck in my mind.
Sure.
But he was really excited about it. I remember that.
Yeah, it was a up and down for Arthur and the denomination. I've heard some stories that, because he was people knew him. I mean, I knew him when I came to Minnesota, because y'all hosted things for the Minnesota Conference during Arthur's time. When I first came to Minnesota, he was still the pastor here. Or no, he was just around. He acted like the pastor here. Sorry. But he was still a very important presence, I think, in the place. But I was going to say, I grew up in Chicago suburbs. You know this because we talked about Downers Grove. I went to the Downers Grove UCC Church, but our youth group, because it was so cool, we went to Willow Creek, which is this 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, and Bill Hybels came to Meetinghouse or Colonial to do workshops and retreats and stuff because Arthur loved Bill Hybels. That church is empty now. Yeah.
Well, he did. Hybels
Yeah.
kind of disgraced himself a little bit.
Well, and his predecessors couldn't get along, or his successors. And so it's gone. Yeah. So, I mean, that was down the street from where okay. So, but that's, yeah, that's just part of it. So I just want to say thank you very much. It's been a super pleasure. I'll see you on Sunday morning preaching from the traditional service, and I'll see you next Wednesday if you're here. And I want to close in prayer. We'll say again, oh God, every time we gather, it is about you and with you and for you and to you. Thank you for guiding us, opening us, and always being with this church regardless of how they live and breathe in the world. Your presence has made such a difference in our lives. Help us do the best we can in the days and months and years to come. Guide us always in your gracious spirit. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Now, did the UCC connect you with us?
No.